everybody, and welcome to another exciting, hair-raising, fun-filled, expeditious episode of Radiorama, where, as the name implies, I show you how to work on mostly radios. Sometimes it's record players, sometimes it's stereos, a lot of things that happen to glow on vacuum tubes. And today we have an RCA model 8-BX-7J. It is a portable / AC powered set. This is atypical for at least American portables of this time period, where you would have the ability to plug it into the wall and engage a rectifier. This little orange tab is the back end of a selenium rectifier that's inside. Or if you were to put it in battery operation, that is taken out of the circuit, and you have two different batteries here. There is a 7.5 volt A battery, and then there is a 90 volt B battery. And some of these had the option where you could put it in flashlight batteries, and that would power. This thing is only powering the filaments. And these typically were cheaper batteries. They didn't last as long because the filaments drain a lot more current. The B battery, on the other hand, that was just providing your B+. And so the power drain off of that was relatively low. You could expect quite a few hours out of a B battery, as much as 90 to 100 hours. Now, I'm going to restore the set, and it's just going to be primarily used on AC for convenience. But if this were your radio and you wanted to run it on batteries, you can just snap a whole bunch of 9 volt batteries together, and newer batteries are of course a lot better than the older batteries. Those will last forever. I'm not sure what you do about the 7.5 volts here. I guess you'd probably have to stick probably a whole bunch of AAA or AA's together, but we're not going to do that in this situation. We're just going to do a generic overhaul recapping job. I can already see from above that someone has been in here. That is a not original electrolytic capacitor. Or maybe it is, I don't know. But the screws, they've definitely been removed. I can see wear marks around it. So someone has definitely been in here before. I remember we tested this, and I believe it actually worked. But let's go ahead and plug it in to see if that's still the case. And don't do what I'm doing. You should bring stuff up slowly. But since I remember it working, I think it's okay just to plug it in and see what happens.
That they are gettable through the air on, the average.
Okay, it does actually work.
Sure. So MinuteClinic Virtual Care is health care. They're seen by our board.
Cool beans. Don't need to power it more than that because there's probably an awful lot of original components inside, including probably what amounts to a whole bunch of dried out, possibly getting ready to or already partially shorting capacitors. And the tubes in these guys, their filaments are so extremely fragile. It's very easy to blow up your entire rail of tubes in these guys. In fact, there's something I really recommend people do not do if you're testing a set like this. If you're pulling tubes and sticking them back in, that's sometimes okay on a AC set with thicker filaments. If you have a set on like this and you start pulling the tubes and sticking back in, you'll pop the filaments right away. So don't do that. So what's next is to disassemble it, which probably, in fact, I know, involves pulling these knobs and some hardware on the inside of the case. Luckily, the case is not cracked. This early polystyrene, or whatever it is, plastic, has a tendency to crack very easily. And since this was a portable, I get so many of these where they've come in and someone's dropped it, and the case is cracked, especially around the hinges. But this one seems to have been treated gently, so that's not happening here. It's fascinating. This looks like kind of a thinner, more consumer version, centric version of their Globetrotter. They used this same wonky antenna on the Globetrotter and Yachtsman portables. Well, this is the innards, and someone's been in here all right, but they did a god-awful job. This is just tape everywhere. I mean, it was done a long time ago. What's this garbage here? Yeah, there's a selenium rectifier. And we have 3 caps in here, 40, 50, and this guy. I bet this guy's probably like a high microfarad count, 100 microfarads at 25 volts. Probably, if it's not still here, no, there's no, I would expect to see an electrolytic capacitor mounted up here, but maybe when the set was new, it was mounted underneath. But, don't you just love untangling someone else's crappy work? But, you know, I guess someone got it to work. I hope that's not a radio repair shop job, because that's pretty awful. That's no good. But what we'll need to do is replace all of these guys. And then there's a whole bunch of paper caps in here. There's this one buried under here, and that one, and probably some other one buried in here that I can't see. The most critical one is going to be this guy. That is the to the chassis ground cap. Let's see, is this guy going? Where's this guy coming from? I'm assuming this, yeah, this tuning condenser floats. So that's not chassis, of course. This is the only chassis cap. That needs to be replaced with a X2, Y2, across the line rated safety capacitator, rated at 0.01 microfarads. And what that will do is it will reduce the current potential getting to the chassis, even though it's pretty difficult to get at this chassis because it's sealed up in a clamshell. If someone were to, for some irreasonable reason, stand on their feet on concrete and touch the chassis at the same time, and if you have a big fat capacitor like that, you could get a little bit of a jolt. Granted, it probably wouldn't kill you. It'd probably feel very uncomfortable. But we're going to reduce that down because this is probably way too big of a value. Back then, they did not really truly understand what it actually took to possibly cause someone's heart to fibrillate. It's a much lower amount of current than we thought. And, I mean, that's just why if you have a GFCI outlet in your house that trips at 5 millivolts or milliamps, that is what we're aiming for, except when we put that 0.01 rated capacitor in there, it's going to be even lower than that. It's probably going to be more like 2 milliamps or less, which is essentially hospital grade at this point. So first things first, we're going to clean up this mess. We're going to have to replace all 3 of those capacitors. And actually, I think there's more than that. There's 2 in this one. That may be out of circuit. Let's see. Is it? No, it looks like that all of these are actually in circuit. So there's 4 electrolytic capacitors. And of course, my modern replacement is going to be tiny. And that's going to clean up a lot of room so I can get at some of these other paper capacitors. Okay, so now that I've yanked this one loose, that's when I can start doing my planning. And I was looking at it, and this common negative goes all the way under here, like it's completely inaccessible. I would have to take the volume pot just to get at that. So I was thinking, well, what else can I do? Because here's the new teeny weeny little caps, and you can see I can just shove those things anywhere because they're so small. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the positives of each of the new electrolytics in their respective locations. Oh man, this is not fun to work on. And then just run the common negative to each and every one. I'll just run some jumpers. I'm thinking it might be better if I just take this off, because then I'll be able to get down in there easier, because that's part of the problem with this like that. It's just in the way. I think you could probably just, oh yeah, probably because the case keeps it held in place. Just pull up on that gently. Voila, problem solved. All right, so let's rearrange these new electrolytics. All right, so we have all 4 of the electrolytic capacitors replaced. And like I said, it's just a matter of being sneaky with where you put things. So we have all of the negatives joined together. and they're all attached to their respective positive locations. So I think I'm going to go ahead and fire it up and see if it still works, because, you know, it's good to make sure that things are working and don't go through the whole thing and then find out you did something wrong. That way you can back up a lot easier. Okay, so I fired it up and got the antenna hooked up here.
That severe? I hope so. That was really fun.
It sounds like a very happy, healthy radio. These portables are pretty sensitive, and they had to be, because unlike the radio in your house where you could just adjust it once and be done, if you had a portable radio, you'd have to be fiddling with it all the time. So they just put much better sensitivity, much better antennas in these things. Alright, so I've replaced all the capacitors, and the next thing I want to do is take out this selenium rectifier. These guys, when they let go, they stink like you would not believe. But we also need to make sure that we have compensating resistance, so that the more efficient basically silicone diode that we're going to put in there is going to be more efficient than this, the selenium. So we need to add some resistance. Basically here we'll increase this so that there's not going to have too much, we're not going to have too much B plus current going through the set. Alright, so I've replaced the selenium with this little tiny diode here. Really compact in here. I put a 100 ohm 10 watt resistor in there. For some reason I feel like when I do this I'm dyslexic and I sometimes get it wrong, so I'm going to test it to make sure it doesn't incinerate. I'm going to have my hand on the plug just in case. I don't have an antenna hooked up. It would have probably blown out by then, and it did not. So let me attach the antenna. We'll see if it actually works. Okay, so now that I have an antenna connected, let's go ahead and try it out again.
Blame Mac Jones for what happened.
Okay, it is working. What I want to do is measure B plus now. I want to make sure that we're not overpowering anything here. Got my multimeter set to DC. 125 there. That seems reasonable. Let's check this guy. 65 volts. That's fine there. This last guy probably has a zilch on it because it's only 25 volt rated. 4 volts. Okay, so we're on the money. That's about where it should be. Seems like it's performing pretty nicely. Great. So now the next thing we need to do is go over and do a safety check to make sure that our safety cap has cleared the way for us to have essentially very low current on the chassis. And I have a little test rig over here that we can try out. Actually, I can't. There's another radio there. Let me clear that off and then we can test it. What I'm going to do is use my little test rig here set to 250 millivolts. And then we translate that on the multimeter over here, 2 volts AC. Maximum reading on that should be about, basically 0.6 of a volt. So here's my probe. And there's going to be, oh hey, and that looks like it's okay on that setting. 0.3, so 50% of what it should be, so I think we're good there. Pass the safety. Alright, so day number 2. Now the next thing that I need to do, now that we have all the caps replaced, and we have our nice new modern diode installed in place of this guy, which has been cut out of circuit, but I'm still using it as basically a terminal connection. It's time to install the audio input feature that I include on all my radios, except if they're historically significant, which this one certainly isn't. It makes the radio a little more usable. The user can not only listen to AM, which sadly has increasingly less music options, and enable them to switch over to playing whatever music or whatever audio they want through the volume pot here. And we're going to make sure that we still keep safety in mind, and that's why we use something here. It's called an isolation transformer. It basically absolutely, it isolates the user from any sort of harmful potential current, even though there's really not much on this chassis because we have the safety cap here. But we just do it. We're above and beyond safe on these guys, are trying to be as safe as we can. What we need to do is also install a switch wire that will temporarily disconnect the AM radio signal and instead open it up just for the incoming audio to go through unimpeded. You can switch the switch back and forth between radio and audio. Preserves the set's original functionality, but again, like, you don't want to have radio reception coming over your music. That would be kind of annoying. There is nowhere to mount it inside of here. It needs to be as close to that volume control as possible. And I've worked on one of these before, and my solution then as now is to put the transformer here and run the skinny little wires through these holes. These are 1-volt tubes. They do not get hot, so I'm not too concerned about this situation here. What I'll also need to do is find a way to permanently secure the incoming audio line. And I think what I'm going to do, we've already got a hole here, but I want to make sure and put a grommet in there so that if you yank on the cord, it's not going to, get cut on that surface there. Anyway, I know there's a whole lot of rambling along, but once I install it, I'll show you and indicate how it works. All right, so we got the Bluetooth running through that Bluetooth, and we have our isolation transformer. And I know this is hard to see, but what we have here is the right and left channels going through a set of 33 ohm resistors. That goes into one side of the secondary side of the isolation transformer. This is 120 volts in to 12 volts out. That's the transformer you look for. And anyway, on the other side we have a resistor that is approximately half the value of the volume pot's resistance and a 0.02 rated cap. That'll make sure that when the audio goes through and the transformer is taken out, that we don't interfere with the set's automatic gain control. We've got this cable running through this hole out the bottom, and then there's a knot up here that will get cinched up around this rubber grommet here, so it's not going to chafe or anything. I've cut the top of the volume pot's lead. I'll eventually need to run a switch wire out to the side so that we can switch the radio back on and off. But I want to see if it does, in fact, work. If it does, we'll hear music when I plug it in. There we go. That's good. So we've got no radio interference, clean audio, we're safe. What I usually do before I call it quits with this part of the installation is I cover this with hot glue. And that way, if this ever works itself loose, all those electrical contacts are sealed up and they're not going to hit anything. That's just me being OCD, because I super glue these down and I've never had one come loose. We interrupt this episode to inject something completely unrelated. It is Christmas Eve and I figured I want to work on something that's different today versus finishing that guy, which is almost done. So logically, I've got this weird, no-name Japanese tuner slash stereo amplifier, and it's all kinds of mess. The original push button on-off thingy is broken off. This guy broke off, so I got a shaft extension to it. And I'm going to do some jerry-rigged goodness. The case is in the car. I'm going to clean up these tubes. These electrolytics are totally fine. I don't know why there's that paper on top of there, but whatever. Also need to replace the wire covers on these two dropping resistors. It's very fragile. They were crumbling in my hands when I was working on underneath here. Observe. Maybe it's not so bad. Scrap that. I did clean up all the controls with deoxit. I'm too cheap to buy that stuff, so I used it at the museum. That's the base switch. I don't know if there's any way I could jerry-rig this by gluing something on top of that. Otherwise, I got a toggle switch to put there. Alright, so I got the weird little stereo up and running. I've got my new switch here and my new tuning knob. And the string broke on the tuner, so I had to restring it. Interestingly enough, like I said, this was in a pile of stuff for free. And the output tubes are actually ECL 82s. And a set of those right now is about $40 to $60. So I guess score, but I'm not going to keep this. It is going to go to one of our shows and will be priced cheaply because of the jerry-rigged nature of it. But it is useful. It's actually got a nice tonal quality to it. I don't have an antenna hooked up to it, but let's see if it does anything anyway. Radio.
Just to get the ball back. I mean, that's the goal right here. Score.
Yes, ho ho ho, Merry Christmas. Everyone else is in their houses drinking eggnog. I'm working on radios. All right, back to our regularly scheduled program of working on the radio. And yesterday I did take out some plastic polish, polished up the case real well. It's looking good. Now it's time to do reassembly, and I forgot that you have to install the antenna by taking this cover off. It's kind of an awkward design, but it is what it is. So we'll do that to put it back in the case, put it back together, and find a place inside for the switch to turn the audio on and off. I don't want to drill a hole in this case, so I'm going to glue it inside. Okay, so I successfully got the chassis back in, and now we have this switch wire, and I think what I'm going to do is put the switch like right here, and what I need to do is make a bracket for it. Well, luckily I have bits of radio sitting around like this. This used to be on the bottom of a chassis of some other radio, and I just cut a piece out of that and make a bracket, and then we're going to glue it right here. And that way there'll be no holes drilled in the cabinet. I used to do that, and a lot of people would say, oh no, you did what? And after a while I decided maybe it's not the best thing to do. So I'm not. Just going to have to tell the future owner, hey, if you want to listen to the radio, or if you want to listen to your music, you have to flip that switch. 99% of the time the people that get these from us, they don't listen to the radio actually. They just want to listen to their music. So I'll just by default have it on the music setting. Okay, I'm not going to win any awards from the United Machinists Organization of America, but here it is. And I roughened up both this bottom part and then this area here. I'm going to stick it like right there. I'm going to use some super glue, and that should do it. Not bad. Some of these little portables actually sound pretty decent. Anyway, I'm going to let it play here for a little while, probably for a couple hours, just to make sure that nothing's going to screw up on it. And because well, actually these tubes don't get hot, but the resistors and everything else in the chassis, if they get hot and open or something else goes haywire, I want it to happen when I'm here versus it going off to someone else's house. So it's always a good idea to burn in your freshly overhauled radios. I think this one will be okay. Anyway, guys, it's been another fun radio that I enjoyed working on, and I hope you learned something out of this. If not, maybe you got entertained. Who knows? Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, you can put them down in the comments section below. And until the next time that another radio comes across the workbench, I see you guys next time. Adios.